There's a moment that changes everything. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It arrives quietly, often in the middle of an ordinary day, and turns your entire understanding of yourself upside down. You're standing in a crowd, or sitting with friends, or scrolling through social media watching everyone else's seemingly perfect lives. And suddenly, with crystalline clarity, you understand you were never meant to fit in. Not because you're broken, not because you failed, not because there's something wrong with you, but because fitting in would require you to betray the very essence of who you are for years, maybe your entire life. You've been trying to squeeze yourself into spaces that were never designed to hold you. You've been twisting yourself into shapes that feel unnatural, forcing yourself to laugh at jokes that aren't funny, pretending to care about things that don't matter, all in the desperate hope that if you just try hard enough, you'll finally belong. But in this moment, you realize belonging was never the goal, because the places you've been trying to fit into were never meant for people like you. Today, we're exploring that pivotal moment of realization when you finally understand that you were never meant to fit in, and why that's not a tragedy, but a liberation, the exhaustion of performance. Think about how much energy you've spent trying to fit in, the constant self-monitoring, the careful calibration of your words, your appearance, your opinions, the endless performance of being someone acceptable, someone normal, someone who belongs. You've learned to read the room and adjust accordingly. You've mastered the art of blending in, of not standing out too much, of being just enough but never too much. You've dulled your shine, muted your voice, compressed your personality into a version that won't make others uncomfortable. And it's exhausting, soul-crushingly, life-drainingly exhausting. You've spent so much time being who you thought you should be that you've almost forgotten who you actually are. The mask has been on so long it started to feel like your face. The failures that confused you every time you tried to fit in and failed, you thought it was your fault. You weren't cool enough, smart enough, attractive enough, successful enough. You needed to try harder, be better, fix whatever was broken in you. You watched others seem to belong effortlessly while you struggled with every interaction. They had the right clothes, the right interests, the right way of being in the world. And you were always slightly off, slightly wrong, slightly too much, or not enough. Each rejection confirmed your fear. There's something fundamentally unacceptable about you. So you tried to change. You studied how other people acted and copied them. You forced yourself to be interested in things that bored you. You laughed when you didn't find things funny. You agreed when you disagreed. And still, somehow, you didn't quite fit, and that confused you. Because you were doing everything right, weren't you? You were following the script. So why wasn't it working? The loneliness of the wrong crowd. Here's the cruelest irony. Sometimes you did manage to fit in. You found a group, joined the club, became part of something. And you should have felt relieved, validated, finally accepted, but instead you felt more alone than ever. Because fitting in by pretending to be someone else is a special kind of loneliness. You're surrounded by people who think they know you, but they only know the version you're performing. The real you is still isolated, still unseen, still fundamentally alone. You sit in rooms full of people and feel completely separate. You're part of the group, but not really. You have friends, but not really. You belong, but not really. Because the person who belongs isn't actually you. When the illusion shatters and then it happens, the moment. It might come during a party where you suddenly see how fake all the interactions are, or during a work meeting where you realize everyone is playing a game you don't want to win, or scrolling through social media where everyone is performing happiness for an audience. Suddenly you see it clearly. You're not failing to fit in, you're succeeding at being yourself in spaces that were never designed for authentic people. The problem isn't you. It's that you've been trying to fit into systems, groups, and cultures that only accept conformity, that reward performance over authenticity, that mistake compliance for belonging. You've been trying to fit into a world that doesn't value what you have to offer: depth, authenticity, originality, truth. And you can't fit into that world without destroying the parts of yourself that actually matter. The relief And the terror, this realization brings simultaneous relief and terror. Relief because you can finally stop trying, stop performing, stop exhausting yourself in pursuit of an acceptance that was never going to feel real anyway. You understand now that the problem wasn't your inability to fit in, it was your attempt to fit into the wrong places. But also terror, because if you're not meant to fit in, where do you belong? If the normal paths aren't for you, what path are you supposed to take? If the standard definitions of success don't apply, how do you measure a life well lived? You're standing at the edge of the known world, and the map you've been following your entire life just burst into flames. You're free, yes, but freedom without direction can feel a lot like being lost. Seeing your history differently with this new understanding, your entire history reframes itself. All those times you failed to fit in, they weren't failures, they were narrow escapes. You weren't being rejected. You were being protected from wasting your life in spaces that would have slowly killed your spirit. All those times you felt like an outsider, you weren't imagining it. You were an outsider because you were never meant to be an insider in those particular spaces. All that loneliness, all that confusion, all that feeling of being fundamentally wrong. It wasn't about you being defective. It was about you being different. And difference in spaces that demand conformity will always feel like defectiveness. Your history isn't a story of failure. It's a story of resistance, often unconscious resistance to becoming someone you were never meant to be. You're built different. Some people are designed to fit in. They're built for it. Their nervous systems aren't overloaded by small talk. Their minds don't question systems and structures. Their souls don't ache for depth and meaning. They can be happy with surface-level existence because that's genuinely enough for them, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with them. But you're built different. Your mind goes deeper. Your heart feels more. Your soul requires more substance. You can't just accept things as they are. You need to understand why they are, whether they should be, what they really mean. You're not broken. You're just a different model. Like trying to use ocean navigation tools in a parking lot, not defective, just designed for different territory. The purpose of outliers, every system needs people who don't fit, who question, who push boundaries, who see what others miss, who refuse to accept the status quo simply because it's the status quo. Progress requires people who are uncomfortable with the way things are. Innovation requires people who think differently. Truth requires people who are willing to be unpopular. You're not meant to fit in because fitting in would neutralize exactly what makes you valuable. Your outsider perspective, your different way of thinking, your refusal to just go along. These aren't bugs in your programming, they're features. The world needs people who don't fit, even if the world doesn't always appreciate them, even if it makes them uncomfortable, even if it means walking a lonelier, the cost of conformity. Now that you've had this realization, you can see clearly what fitting in would have cost you. It would have cost you your authenticity, your originality, your depth, your truth. It would have cost you the ability to think for yourself, to feel deeply, to question freely, to be fully yourself. You would have gained acceptance, yes, but you would have lost yourself in the process. And what good is belonging if the person who belongs isn't actually you? Some people make that trade and live their entire lives as pale imitations of who they could have been. They fit in perfectly. They're accepted, included, part of the group. And they die having never really lived as themselves. You almost made that trade. But something in you, call it your soul, your authentic self, your inner truth, refused. It kept making you uncomfortable in spaces that required you to be false. It kept sabotaging your attempts to conform. And now you understand that discomfort was protecting you. Your inability to fit in was saving your life, mourning the dream of normal. Even with this understanding, there's grief. You're mourning the dream of normal, the fantasy that you could be like everyone else, that life could be simple, that you could find your place in the existing structures and be happy there. There's a loss in realizing you'll always be somewhat apart, that you'll never have the easy belonging others seem to have, that your path will be more difficult, more isolated, more uncertain. You're grieving the version of yourself you thought you'd become, the one who fit in, who is accepted, who found their place in the world without having to create it from scratch. This grief is real and valid. Let yourself feel it, because you are losing something, not something you ever really had, but something you believed was possible. And the death of that belief hurts. The anger phase after grief often comes anger. Anger at the systems that demand conformity. Anger at the people who reject authenticity. Anger at a world that makes being yourself so difficult. Why do you have to be different? Why can't things just be easier? Why is the world set up to reward people who fit in and punish people who don't? This anger is also valid. The world does make it harder for people like you. Society does reward conformity and punish originality. It's not fair, it's not right. But here's what you learn. The anger is a phase, a necessary phase, but not a destination. Because anger at the world for being what it is will only trap you in bitterness. The goal isn't to change the world into a place where you finally fit. The goal is to build a life that doesn't require fitting in. The acceptance that changes everything. Eventually, if you're lucky, you reach acceptance, not resignation, acceptance. The profound understanding that this is who you are, and that's not just okay, it's exactly right. You accept that you were never meant to fit in, and you stop seeing that as a problem to solve. You stop trying to fix yourself. You stop apologizing for being different. You stop performing normalcy. You accept that your path will be different from most people's paths, that your life will look strange to people who value conventional success, that you'll never be understood by everyone, or even by most people. And in that acceptance, something miraculous happens. You stop caring about fitting in. Because you finally understand that fitting in would mean betraying yourself, and you're no longer willing to do that. Creating your own belonging. If you don't fit into existing spaces, you have to create your own. This is harder, yes, but it's also infinitely more rewarding. You start building a life that actually fits who you are, rather than trying to fit yourself into a pre-existing life. You create work that matters to you, not work that impresses others. You cultivate relationships based on authenticity, not convenience. You define success by your own metrics, not society's. This requires courage, because you're walking off the map. You're building without a blueprint. You're creating a life that doesn't have a template. But here's what you discover: freedom. Real freedom. Not the fake freedom of having multiple acceptable options, but the genuine freedom of living according to your own values, your own truth, your own design. Finding your actual people. Just because you don't fit in with the mainstream doesn't mean you're meant to be alone forever. It means your people are rarer, harder to find, but infinitely more valuable when you find them. There are others like you, other square pegs who've stopped trying to fit into round holes, other people who value depth, authenticity, truth, meaning, other souls who understand that not fitting in isn't a failure, it's an identity. When you find these people, the connection is profound, because it's not based on performing or pretending. It's based on mutual recognition, seeing someone and being seen in return. These connections are rare, but one authentic connection is worth 1,000 superficial ones. And now that you've stopped trying to fit in, you finally have the space and energy to find and nurture these real relationships, the life that's actually yours. What does a life look like when you stop trying to fit in? It looks like yours, uniquely, authentically, unapologetically yours. It might not look impressive to others. It might not make sense to your family. It might not be what anyone expected from you, but it's aligned with who you actually are, not who you're supposed to be. You make choices that serve your truth rather than your image. You pursue paths that fulfill you rather than validate you. You build a life that feels right from the inside, even if it looks strange from the outside. And for the first time, you're not exhausted by the effort of existing, because you're not performing anymore. You're not trying to be acceptable. You're just being yourself. And that, it turns out, requires far less energy than pretending. What you gained by being different, not fitting in, forced you to develop qualities that people who easily fit in never have to develop. You developed self-awareness because you had to understand yourself deeply to figure out why you didn't fit. You developed critical thinking because you had to question the systems that rejected you. You developed authenticity because performing never quite worked for you anyway. You learned to be comfortable alone, which is a superpower most people never develop. You learn to trust yourself when the crowd disagrees with you. You learn that external validation is nice but not necessary for survival. These qualities, self-awareness, critical thinking, authenticity, self-reliance, these are the gifts of not fitting in, and they're more valuable than any acceptance you could have gained by conforming. The contribution only you can make because you don't fit in. You see things others miss. You question things others accept. You create things others wouldn't think to create. Your outsider perspective is valuable. Your different way of thinking is needed. Your refusal to conform is essential. The contributions you're meant to make can only come from someone who doesn't fit in, because fitting in means thinking like everyone else, seeing like everyone else, creating like everyone else. The world has enough people who fit in. What it needs, what it's always needed, is people who don't. People who push boundaries, challenge norms, think differently, create new possibilities. You're one of those people. And that's not a burden, it's a calling. The freedom of being yourself, ultimately, the greatest gift of realizing you were never meant to fit in, is this: you're free to be yourself. You're no longer imprisoned by the need for acceptance. You're no longer performing for an audience. You're no longer exhausting yourself trying to be someone you're not. You can say what you actually think, feel what you actually feel, want what you actually want, be who you actually are. This freedom is terrifying at first because it comes with responsibility. The responsibility of defining yourself rather than being defined by others. The responsibility of creating your own path rather than following someone else's. But it's also exhilarating because for the first time, you're living your life, not some approved version of it. You're writing your own story, not playing a role in someone else's. The moment you realize you were never meant to fit in is the moment your real life begins. Everything before that moment was preparation. All that trying and failing, all that confusion and loneliness, all that sense of not being quite right. It was all leading you here, to this understanding, to this acceptance, to this freedom. You were never meant to fit in because you were meant to stand out. Not in the Instagram influencer look at me way, but in the authentic, this is who I am, take it or leave it way. You were never meant to fit in because you were meant to forge your own path, to create your own definition of success, to build a life that reflects your truth rather than society's expectations. You were never meant to fit in, because the world needs people who don't, who think differently, who question freely, who refuse to compromise their authenticity for comfort. Yes, it's a harder path. Yes, it's a lonelier path. Yes, it's a path that most people will never understand, but it's your path, the only one that was ever truly yours. So stop trying to fit in. Stop apologizing for being different. Stop exhausting yourself trying to be acceptable to people who will never fully accept you anyway. Instead, be radically, unapologetically yourself. Build a life that fits who you actually are. Find the few people who see you and celebrate them. Create work that matters to you. Live according to your own values because you were never meant to fit in. You were meant to be free. And freedom, it turns out, is worth every bit of acceptance you never got. Thank you for watching Motivation Thrones. If you've finally realized you were never meant to fit in, welcome to your real life. Share this with someone who's still trying to squeeze into spaces too small for them. And remember, not fitting in isn't a failure. It's your first act of freedom.